In the dead of night on Christmas Eve, I was roused from a deep slumber by an unsettling silence. The only sound was the distant tolling of a church bell, its echo reverberating through the frosty air. Outside, a pristine blanket of snow stretched out under the ghostly moonlight, shimmering like a field of diamonds. Across the street, the festive lights of a neighbor's house twinkled ominously, casting long, eerie shadows. A jarring crash from the living room suddenly splintered the tranquil silence. The sound ricocheted off the walls, followed by the haunting groan of the aged wooden floor under the weight of unseen feet. An icy dread washed over me, each pulse of my heart echoing in my ears like a war drum. My mind was a whirlwind of panic. Had I not meticulously checked and secured all the doors before going to sleep? Gathering every shred of courage, I slipped into my robe, the soft fabric whispering against my skin, a stark contrast to the terror gnawing at my insides. I tread lightly towards the bedroom door, each step a silent prayer against the unknown. Through a narrow crack, the warm, festive glow of our Christmas tree spilled into the cold hallway. It was a beacon of holiday cheer, its light painting an otherworldly tableau on the canvas of our living room. The tree stood tall in the darkness of the night, its bright colors throwing odd, flickering shadows that danced and changed shape on the walls. Each shiny ornament mirrored the light in a ghostly dance that was both comforting and eerie. I heard a soft rustle, a creepy sound that made me nervous. A big, scary shadow appeared next to the tree, twisting and turning on the wall, as if it was a creature that came out only at night. I held back a gasp, catching my breath in fear as I pulled back into the safer space of my room. From behind the nightstand, my trembling hands found the reassuring solidity of the baseball bat I kept hidden. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, fueling my resolve as I ventured out of my sanctuary, bat raised and ready to strike. Each step down the hallway echoed with foreboding, the soft glow of the Christmas tree growing brighter, casting long, monstrous shadows that seemed to reach out for me. The shadow by the tree seemed to pulse and grow with each heartbeat, a terrifying reminder of the intruder in our home on this sacred night. The scent of pine and cinnamon, once comforting reminders of the holiday season, now hung heavy in the air, a cruel mockery of the terror that gripped me. This was Christmas Eve, a time for joy and celebration, but the festive cheer had been replaced by a chilling dread. As I took another step, the floorboards beneath me creaked ominously, a dreadful reminder of the horror that awaited me in the living room. As I rounded the corner into the living room, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears, I could finally discern the figure. It was hunched under the tree, its form obscured by the shadows, seemingly rummaging amongst the brightly wrapped presents. I steeled myself, my grip tightening on the bat, ready to confront the intruder who dared to violate our sanctuary on this sacred night. But as I stepped fully into the room, bat poised to swing, an icy wave of shock washed over me, freezing me in my tracks. The intruder was not the menacing shadow that had loomed so ominously just moments ago. His boots were black as coal, their shiny gold buckles glinting in the festive glow of the Christmas tree. They looked oversized, almost comically so, yet seemed to fit him perfectly. His red stocking cap, trimmed with the whitest fur, sat jauntily atop a head of snowy white hair. It was as if a splash of color had been added to the monochrome palette of the night. Instead of pilfering my belongings, he was pulling brightly wrapped gifts from a seemingly bottomless sack. Each package was wrapped meticulously, tied with ribbons that sparkled under the tree lights. He placed them under the tree with a gentleness that was almost reverential. The rustling sound I had heard earlier was not the sound of theft, but of generosity. The scent of pine was suddenly stronger, mingling with a new aroma, a hint of peppermint, and the comforting smell of freshly baked cookies. It was a scent that transported me back to my childhood Christmases, filling the room with a warmth that pushed away the chill of fear that had gripped me. The sight was uncanny, surreal even. My mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. The fear that had fueled my adrenaline was replaced by a sense of awe and disbelief. My heart pounded in my chest, not with terror, but with the shock of the unexpected. There he was, Santa Claus himself, larger than life, in my living room on Christmas Eve. As I stood frozen in the living room, my mind was a whirlpool of confusion and fear. I had triple-checked each lock before heading to bed, except for the chimney. Was Santa Claus actually real? Or was this some crazy hallucination, sparked by too much holiday spirit and an overdose of eggnog? Paralyzed, I watched as Santa completed his task. He straightened up, his sack now surprisingly empty, and turned to face me. His eyes, sparkling like the fairy lights on the tree, locked onto mine. We stood there in a moment of shared silence, our quietude punctuated only by the soft crackle of the fire. Then, with a knowing wink and a nod, he touched the side of his nose, let out a hearty laugh that filled the room, and disappeared up the chimney. The echoes of his laughter still lingered as I stood there, stunned into silence. The Christmas tree now cast a strange, surreal glow across the room. The presents under the tree, neatly wrapped and placed with care, now served as eerie reminders of this bizarre encounter. Retreating to my bedroom, the distant tolling of the church bell felt sinister. The twinkling lights from the houses across the street seemed mocking. This Christmas Eve brought an unexpected guest, leaving behind not just presents, but a haunting memory that would forever change my perception of Christmas. This bewildering encounter with Santa Claus sent my life spiraling into chaos. I grappled for a lifeline in the tumultuous sea of confusion that had become my existence. I sought therapy, hoping to find clarity and a way back to reality. The therapist tried hard to comprehend my tale. Each session was a labyrinth of questions and answers, an attempt to decipher the enigma that my life had turned into. Their gazes, filled with concern and disbelief, tracked my every word as they scribbled notes. The scratching of their pens against paper was a discordant soundtrack to the disarray in my mind. As I narrated my encounter with Santa, the therapy rooms transformed into a battleground where reality and fantasy collided. I watched their belief in my sanity erode, replaced by a growing alarm. They employed every technique in their arsenal, from bibliotherapy to cognitive restructuring, but the line between reality and fantasy had blurred irreversibly. My world began to warp. The familiar morphed into the alien, the mundane into the mystical. It was as though I had crossed through a mirror into a parallel universe where Santa Claus was real, and I alone bore this incredible knowledge. Eventually, their concern hardened into conviction. They labeled me insane, a verdict as cold and harsh as the sterile walls of the institution they committed me to. My home one day, the next, a chilling, impersonal cell. The world outside spun merrily on, oblivious to my plight. The institution was a place of nightmares, akin to scenes from a horror movie. The once human faces of the hospital staff morphed into grotesque elves or Santa Claus heads, their bodies shaking unnaturally. The hallowed halls echoed with distorted Christmas carols, twisting the merry tunes into eerie dirges. This was a place where reality and fantasy were indistinguishable, where every day was a terrifying Christmas nightmare. The toll of this twisted reality was immense. My mental state deteriorated drastically, and I was moved from the regular wards to solitary confinement. The room was no bigger than a small closet. The walls painted a sickly, peeling shade of yellow that seemed to absorb every sliver of light. The only sound was the incessant drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing like a hammer against my skull. The floor was cold and hard beneath me, rough concrete that scraped against my skin and left it red and raw. The air was stale, thick with the bitter taste of despair that clung to the back of my throat. It was a sensory deprivation chamber, designed to break even the strongest of minds. And yet, even in this small, desolate space, Santa Claus made his presence known. He didn't physically appear. There was no room for that. Instead, he manifested in the shadows that danced on the walls, in the whisper of the wind that somehow found its way into my cell, in the chill that seeped into my bones despite the absence of any windows. His laughter echoed in my ears, a cruel parody of the jolly ho-ho-ho I remembered from childhood tales. His eyes stared at me from every crack in the wall, every stain on the ceiling, every reflection in the polished metal of my meal tray. Time became an elusive concept. Sleep and wakefulness blurred into one another, dreams and nightmares indistinguishable from reality. The line between conscious and unconscious thought was erased, leaving me in a perpetual state of limbo. Was I asleep? Was I awake? Was I dreaming? Or was I living a nightmare? I couldn't tell anymore. Even the arrival of food became part of this twisted reality. Trays would appear at irregular intervals, their contents unappetizing and barely edible. But I wasn't sure if they were real or just another figment of my fractured mind. The taste was bland, the texture rubbery, and each bite was a struggle to swallow. The toll of this existence was immense, my sanity frayed at the edges, unraveled by the unending solitude and the relentless presence of Santa Claus. The world around me seemed to distort and warp, my perceptions unreliable, and my mind teetering on the brink of collapse. Outside the cold, harsh walls of my prison, life goes on. My family and friends are left in the wake of my sudden departure, their lives forever marked by the space I used to fill. Their confusion is palpable, even through the fog of my own bewilderment. They spend countless hours trying to understand. How did I fall so far? Why didn't they see the signs? The questions hover, unanswered. The sadness in their lives is a heavy shroud. I can feel it, even within these walls. They miss me, my laughter, my quirks, my presence. I'm a missing puzzle piece in the tapestry of their lives, an empty space that cannot be replaced. Meanwhile, I remain trapped in this horrifying reality, cut off from the world outside. My life is an endless loop of terrifying nightmares and crushing loneliness. I am a prisoner, not just of this institution, but of my own mind. Through it all, one thing remains constant: the haunting specter of Santa Claus, a chilling reminder of the encounter that had thrown me into this terrifying reality.